Yeah, just think about some of the choices to navigate at the moment. Have you got a leadership or have you got a training investment? What do you do with your investment around leadership? Do you centralise it? Do you decentralise it? Where do the decisions get made? Where do the dollars get placed in terms of the investments that you make? How do we get an ROI in such a highly volatile and such a highly mobile employment market? There's so much going on. Is it appropriate for us to make the investment? What do we do and when do we do it? Face-to-face, virtual, e-learning, hybrid, all of these choices need to be navigated in terms of the way in which we want to place our bets. What technology do we choose? Do we go in-source? Do we go outsource? Do we need an LMS? Do we need an app? Which way do we go? And then in the background, just around the technology piece, there's the cyber, there's AI and the digital play. How's all that going to sort of influence the way in which we choose to invest in our leadership into the future? And then we've got the opportunity to be able to determine how we actually lead this with our organisation. So what we want to do today is share the insights of an expert panel. We're very appreciative of the opportunity for each of our panel members to be able to share their insights and also to enable you to be able to share the implications of the topics that we actually cover. Thanks, Jenna. So just to kick off, I'd just like to acknowledge our welcome to country, acknowledge the Wurundjeri clan of the Kulin Nation on whose land I meet with you. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and also to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So at Lighthouse, we help CEOs, C-suites and ODs to build world-class enterprise leadership teams. What we ideally like to see them deliver is the exhilaration of collective high-performance achievement. You can probably recall times in your business career, it might be at sport, it might be personally, when you're part of a team that really functions, really delivers the outcome that we all want to be a part of. And that feeling burns within us. And if we're in an environment where we have the opportunity to be able to create that with teams, that's the outcome that we're ideally looking for. What we believe in is systemizing leadership capabilities with strategy to enable that outcome to occur. So I'll take you through how we go about that particular process very quickly, and then we'll start our conversation with the panelists. We use a model at Lighthouse called Align, Change and Empower. We call it the ACE model, ACE. And we start with the executive leadership team. And this is typically with, it might be a CEO or a C-suite. It might be a new executive within their first sort of 6 months of appointment. There might be a change in the landscape that's created by might be a merger acquisition or a divestment or a change in strategy. So the first thing we do is work with the leadership team, and we look to create alignment with the leadership team. So this involves the opportunity for us to do perhaps some pre-work, and we might engage some stakeholders and some customers to be able to provide some feedback in terms of the context for the leadership team. Then we work closely to co-create with the leadership team. Our experience is that the solutions are always within the team. Our role is to synthesize the answers and to work with the team to be able to extract those answers from the team. Once we've actually got those answers, it gives us the opportunity to be able to consolidate the responses that each of the leadership team provides to be able to inform the purpose, the vision and the common goal of the team, the values and the behaviours which actually define the team, the barriers and the breakthroughs. How do we actually work our way through the things that might actually hold us back? And then finally, developing the critical goals for the leadership team. What's interesting there is we look at the concept of primary team. The goals that I hold as part of the leadership team, the goals for my team, or the goals for the team that I'm actually a part of? And it's a very interesting question, this concept of primary team, because in a lot of cases we find that most leaders will say the team that's their primary team is the team that they lead. And that starts to then see management and also starts to see silos built. Whereas if we start to look at the context where my team is the team that I'm a part of, then that changes the outcomes for the teams. And that helps us to create alignment. Once we have alignment, we then start to work with the extended leadership team. And there we're looking for the consistent communication and cascading of the strategy that's been created by the ELT. so that we're getting the change, we're getting the consistency, and we're getting the message out to the broader organisation around the alignment of the strategy and culture of the business. And then finally, we start to invest in capability. What do we need to do to empower the rest of our leadership population to be able to deliver disciplined execution of the strategy within the business? So as you can see there, it covers each of the different functions: sales, service, finance and operations, a broad range of capabilities, but it has this cascade effect, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The last thing we'll make a quick comment on before we hand across to the panel is we look to create a leadership roadmap. Again, as I mentioned, co-create it with the executive leadership team. We link it very closely to the business goals. You can see the executive leadership team, extended leadership team and future leaders are all informed in terms of the investments that we choose to make. We calendarise them, we prioritise them, and then we measure them. So typically we have a transformation partner that will actually work with each of the teams that we work with. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of how we systemise, and now we're going to hand over to the conversation that we'll have with the panel. So I'd just like to introduce you to our panel today. We have Vicky Carter, who's the Head of HR within Pernod Ricard. Welcome, Vicky. We have Glenn McDermott, who's talent and a capability lead for a number of ASX listed organisations over the journey. Welcome, Glenn. Great to have you. Thanks, to be Mark. Part of our event.
Pleasure to be
and
here.
Also welcome to Claire Howes, who's the Head of Talent and Learning at Cleanaway. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to hand across to each of the panel members. They're going to describe a particular investment that they've made in leadership over the last 12 months and use that to create a bit of a frame to engage in the conversation. I'll spend some time with Vicky looking at the alignment to strategy. Then we're going to spend some time on influencing your stakeholders with Glenn. And then we'll close out with spending some time on the leadership roadmap. And that's a very interesting area, leadership roadmap, capability framework, and these sorts of areas, which Claire's going to be kind enough to spend some time with us on. So what I might do is just hand across to you, Vicky, and perhaps you might want to introduce yourself and also just cover the particular leadership investment that you want to frame the conversation and why you've chosen that investment.
Yeah,
thanks,
perfect.
Vicky.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for having me along. I'd actually like to acknowledge the Nudgee people. I'm presenting from Stockwell today in the beautiful Barossa Valley in South Australia. Just to give you a little bit of a background in terms of the organisation I work for. So I'm part of Pernod Ricard, an affiliate of part of Pernod Ricard, which is Pernod Ricard Winemakers. So we're basically the wine division of the business. We have some fantastic brands, and those of you that like to drink wine, you might recognise some of our brands in Jacobs Creek, St Hugo or Brancott Estate. That's just to name a few. As I mentioned before, we're part of a bigger organisation, Pernod Ricard, and Pernod Ricard employs about 18,000 plus people worldwide. So pretty big multinational. So at Winemakers, we have an operations part of the business, and that operations part of the business makes and distributes the wine. But we also have a corporate and commercial part of the business, which is around, the marketing and the sale of wine, but also the Pernod Ricard spirits as well. And we operate across the Pacific, but also Spain and New Zealand. So it gives you a bit of an understanding of how diverse our organisation is. My role is leading up capability and inclusion within the Winemakers remit. So in terms, Mark, of the investment or our biggest investment around leadership development, we've been really focused on coaching skills for our senior leaders. And I know I'm going to talk about strategy in a minute, but the reason we really wanted to focus on that key area is our strategy, our global strategy is around transforming and accelerating the business. And a key component to that is really getting more from the core. And what we mean by that is not just more from our brands that we have, but more from our people and really capitalising on their strengths in order to grow the business. So essentially the reason that we landed on coaching as the key focus for the next 12 months is it's really important that coaching really builds the business into a high performing business and really empowers our people to really push themselves further in terms of accountability and achievement.
Thanks, Vicky. So is there any other comments there that you'd like to make just in terms of alignment of strategy or how you started to bring the strategy together with that particular priority capability?
Yeah, great. So essentially, Mark, if we talk about the connection to the strategy, we really did focus on that more from the core. So really by developing strong leaders in the organisation, we feel that our leaders would be better prepared for challenges and really drive change within an organisation, because we are changing at a rapid pace. And it's really about being able to support their people throughout that change. I'd like to mention as well, in addition to the connection to the strategy, there's a really important connection for coaching skills to our leadership framework. So it's not just about the what, it's really about the how. And we introduced a new leadership framework probably about 5 years ago now. And there's a really great level of maturity in our organisation in terms of understanding that framework and that model. Coaching is a fundamental aspect to the competencies within that model, right? So we have competencies such as collaborating with others, empowering teams, developing talent, but also, really addressing some of those difficult issues. So there was a really clear connection from coaching to our leadership model as well.
That's excellent, Vicky. And with your priority capability, what was the data or the process? What was it that actually informed the choice that you made with the coaching investment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And of course, if you want to put in any capability program, you need some data or process in order to be able to inform your focus on that area. So firstly, going back to our leadership model. So I mentioned previously, we've got some level of maturity around it. It's firmly embedded in our performance review process, right? So the what and the how. As part of that performance review process that we do on an annual basis, that's not unique, very common in very large organisations, we identified that there was some gaps in the area of coaching, right? So we could see that we needed to uplift our coaching capability for our senior managers, and as part of the performance review, it was signalling that that's kind of an area that we really needed to focus on. So leadership model first and foremost, and then a performance review. Our wellbeing results quite interesting, and again, this is probably not unique in our organisation, but we really needed to focus on how we can help reduce stress for our people and help with greater prioritisation. So we know that managers who really prioritise work-life balance through coaching, they create a really great supportive environment by encouraging our employees to actually set boundaries and really manage their own time effectively. But not only that, is break down those barriers to decision making, right? Because they really feel empowered to be able to make those decisions. And I guess finally, there was a lot of feedback from our wider HR team in regards to less reliance on them to have those conversations, and really wanting managers to focus on having the conversations themselves and providing them a framework in order to be able to have those conversations.
That's good, Vicky. And I just saw a question pop up in the chat from Shamini that was asking what coaching model you use.
Yeah, I guess not surprisingly, we really do focus on the GROW model, and we're actually working with Lighthouse on the program. So the GROW model isn't the only thing that we use. We also focus on the feedback model with SBI, and also our gaps grid as well. So we've really worked quite closely with Lighthouse in terms of some of the best practice models that that they're using around coaching and feedback. And so far, it's going really well.
That's good, Vicky, and thank you very much for the endorsement. How did you build the business case, and how did you get the funding, and how did you get the engagement of the senior leadership to be able to make sure that you had the appropriate resources to be able to drive the priority capability?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess it's coming back to those other things that I've already spoken about, right? So there was a clear connection just to business strategy. Um, it was really also important to make sure that I was able to communicate to the executive team how coaching actually supports A, our leadership model, right? But B, also the other leadership programs that we have in the organisation, because we have quite a few globally and locally, right? So it was how the coaching framework actually supports those other development opportunities in the organisation. It really does help to have a really supportive HR director, right, that is invested in coaching. And he went through the entire program with the entire HR team prior to us actually taking it to the executive team. So it really gave him a good understanding in terms of the, I guess, the value of the program. And that he was actually willing to invest his time as well, because the coaching program that we have implemented, it is over a 2-month period. It's a big time investment, and there's lots of things that you actually need to do in between each of the sessions in the program as well. So that certainly helped with him going through the program. But also the great bit is that our HR team understands the methodology now, right? So now that we're implementing it with our senior leaders, they're really able to support them in terms of their ongoing learning, and also review that success, right? Just seeing whether the managers are actually having those more successful coaching conversations.
That's excellent, Vicky. That's an excellent summary that you've been kind enough to provide us there. If anyone's got any questions that they'd like to would like Vicky to respond to, feel free to just jump into the chat and send us across some questions. But in the meantime, we might shift across to Glenn McDermott. Thank you very much, Vicky. What we're going to do now is start to have a bit of a conversation around the stakeholders, and also perhaps, Glenn, I might just swing across to give you the opportunity to be able to provide a brief introduction, and also to give us an insight into the capability priority that you've chosen.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. Pleasure to be here, everyone. Thanks, and hope everyone is staying nice and warm and trying to battle away those colds that we're all experiencing at the moment. As Mark said, Glenn McDermott. I've played a key role in leading talent and capability functions across a number of ASX organisations across the last 15, 20 years. And wanted to share and discuss some of my, I think, insights in terms of really that link to strategy and managing some things at times, some tricky stakeholders. Certainly my experiences has been gained in organisations where often different divisions and different business units have run quite independently of one another. So very much that silo type of approach that many of us have experienced in our corporate lives, and how we might go about gaining that unification of a single-based approach. And then at the same time as well too, then how to really look to harmonise and unite some of those activities, and as we've heard about already from Vicky, about how do we gain a one best way point of agreement when different parts of the business may have gone off into different directions as well too. I've worked quite extensively in a lot of heavier type and male dominated industries. I imagine, Vicky, the winemakers is something that's probably a little bit more of a mixed bag, but some of my most recent experiences have been in automotive, which is very heavily male dominated, probably around 70 to 80% minimum of male team members. So that can certainly be an area to influence as well, from a group that might be slightly different to some other workplace compositions. The key part I think that I'm looking to focus on and share some of my insights with the group is around really gaining some of that support for leadership investment from some of those key stakeholders when it might be new to an organisation, of a really united and combined based approach. And some of those I guess insights and things that I've been thinking about and considering and have no doubt acted upon in a really heavy level of investment of my time, is really getting stakeholders to ultimately advocate for the pathway that you're looking to go down. And I'm sure many individuals on this call is really familiar with that nemawashi approach, that the Japanese term of you come to the meeting and everybody's teed up in the background and had already reached a point of agreement that, yes, my proposal is the right way forward and I'm in agreement of that to move forward. But I think at times, within certainly my own experiences and experiencing with other HR professionals, is that we can sometimes undervalue that process of nemawashi and really spending and taking the time out to meet with each of those real key stakeholders across your organisation or your different divisions to really get behind your concept or your way forward. And part of that can be, one, the educational piece. The individuals that you may be dealing with may not necessarily have those big enterprise experiences where they know coaching is important. Feedback is really, really important. And also then the way in which that we manage performance and some of those linkages that we as OD people really go and we immediately say, well, why do we want to do this as an activity? And in our brains, we always default back into, we do it for engagement. People need feedback to be on track. And we know that all of those key pieces that we often defer to really have that natural linkage into what we want trying to do to help performance. I think some of the things that I've really tried to do across the journey in bringing in some of those investments into leadership development and then on other activities like capability frameworks and learning pathways and what have you, is really using your key stakeholders as advocates. And how you go about using that as advocates is, as I said, drawing some of those conclusions that they may not naturally make. We make it because we think about it all the time and we operate it and we see HBR articles and we go, oh, that's an interesting concept. But really breaking it down for our teams and really what does that mean for them? Highlighting the linkages with your values as an organisation. And Vicky mentioned earlier about developing your people is one key element of Pernod Ricard, and helping your leaders see that this is an opportunity, if it's not called out explicitly, to really help them demonstrate that value to the rest of the business, that they're not only supportive, but they're a key advocate and driving the development of their people through that demonstration of value. And we all know that there's any good time to have time out of the business for leadership development, or let's face it, even holidays. But I can guarantee you is that my experience would tell me is that if you say to someone, hey, you can go on a free golf day and go and play 18 holes and we'll put on lunch and a few drinks afterwards, people find time. And we know that they find time by making it beneficial to the individual. And why would I want to pursue this particular course of action? I think the piece in terms of really outlining that effort versus reward is something that we undervalue as well too. And often I think the egotistical lens attached to that is certainly around you as a leader. And if Mark is leading an organisation as an example, or a business division, how the perception of Mark as a developer of talent feeding the rest of the organisation because of those individuals that have come from Mark's division can be a really positive way to influence some leadership behaviours about getting behind that and the perception that creates as a cultivator of talent, and demonstrating those values as a business becomes ever important across the business.
And with the identification of the key leaders or the key stakeholders in your leadership investment, how did you go about that and how did you sort of build that advocacy? What are some of the tactics that you utilise to be able to build that engagement amongst your stakeholders, or the advocacy that was referring to?
Yeah, I think it really does vary depending on I think in part the maturity of the leader. And then also where they are in their baseline of experience. So some leaders that we'll encounter and really linking back into that nemawashi point of making sure that people understand the why and what you're doing and the cause and effect associated with that. I think really spending the time with each of those really critical leaders and kind of breaking it down in your own head or even on paper and thinking about it in terms of a racy type of model. Who needs to be, across it, who needs to understand it, who's impacted, all the rest of those kind of things, and your key influencer wheel. So do they understand what I'm doing and why, and what their role within that is? So I think talking about it at that high level, saying, I'd really like you to be an advocate. Well, what does that actually look like? What do you actually want them to do? And breaking that down into very tangible pieces, whether that be at a steering committee meeting, I'd like you to be supportive of. When we table this as a solution, I'd like your endorsement that this is the right way forward, and really putting it onto those leaders that you're looking to influence and gain support is really how we as an organisation wants to demonstrate our values and demonstrate our commitment to our people. And every organisation where I've worked will often say that our people are our greatest asset. How do we now go about taking our values and our posters on the wall, and you can't see anything behind me on the wall, but trust me, it's there, is essentially about, well, how do you now bring that to life? And often our leaders are really struggling, especially in a remote and hybrid environment, about how do I now bring that element of my performance as a leader into the fore when I only see my people one day a week, and really aiding them and making it explicitly clear. And part of your communication strategy needs to be about, how do I educate leaders about what those expectations are? As this has been bubbling in our heads as OD folks and enterprise leaders for 6, 8, 12 months, whatever that looks like, how do I really make that explicitly clear about what's the ask or the call to action for our leaders, and making sure that is so abundant in approach, is that they understand exactly what they need to do, when they need to do it, and using in part sometimes the key people around them that influence. So if you're working in a really competitive environment, how do you demonstrate that that Claire, the leader of X division, is already part way through this, versus Vicky, who's yet to start? Some of that competitive tension can also be a way to help advocate that this is a really key component, and using some of those as highlight points as well to demonstrate that ARC is well advanced to the rest of the business in this space, and kind of looking to just tweak and maybe pat the ego a little bit as well too when you need to do that.
That's good, Glenn. Well done. And if any of the anyone in the audience has any questions just in relation to stakeholder influence, feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll look forward to answering those if we've got the opportunity through the event. What about stakeholders with conflicting priorities, Glenn? I mean, how do you go navigating through the situation where you've got a couple of different outcomes that are being sought by stakeholders that are going to create conflict within the broader team?
Yeah, I find that one a really tricky one, Mark, to be honest with you. I think that there's a couple of things that kind of come to mind when those are conflicting. It almost comes back into how competitive a landscape that organisation is. And why I say that is it really comes into the priority now will not necessarily be the priority into the future if we don't invest in certain elements. And I think what we've seen across the last 6 to 12 months with the Great Resignation is that if we don't invest in our people now, the byproduct of that will be they'll seek out the organisations where they can really gain some of those elements as well. And calling out as OD leaders and leaders across the HR space is really around, we understand that the business is extremely busy and everyone is continually asked to execute more and more and more, often with the same or less, highlighting and really thinking about what does our intervention look like and what are we actually trying to do, and how do I break it down even more simply than I already have. And I think that's where asking for that advocacy and asking for feedback across the different interventions that you're looking to put in place. Again, as OD folks, this is bubbling around in our minds for 6 to 12 months, and we think that it all makes sense for us, and it's straightforward. When you start to overlay that with 150 things that a leader needs to execute day on day, is this adding to their pile of stress, or is it streamlining their existing piles of stress? So I think where Vicky called out some really great pieces of alignment are coaching your team members. So, teach a man to fish versus give them a fish, that kind of stuff. And then into your performance management conversations around, if you're having ongoing coaching conversations, your 3-hour preparation window for your performance conversation is now substantially condensed because you've had many bite-sized conversations across the course of the journey. So that ability to really talk about business priorities is using this as an enabler. How am I going to help you? And really putting our best salesperson's hat on and saying, how do I sell this to the business? Is about efficiency of scale, efficiency of time, and enabling you to be your best self and focus on the key elements of your role. And especially in organisations where maybe the maturity piece isn't there, and there are some of the ability to recognise that this HR stuff is a significant value add, especially when we start to highlight some of those linkages between performance and feedback and engagement. and then also engagement surveys if it's an organisation in which that they value what are those scores at an enterprise level, investing in some of these key pieces and creating that expectation across all levels of leadership to be able to execute certainly becomes a really integral part of ongoing conversations to enable leaders to not only be thinking about the impact that they have on people, but if they don't do it, what's the impact on their people as well too? And you quickly become busy seeking out new team members to replace the ones that are seeking a better team member experience. And we've obviously, everyone clearly has a number of articles and all the rest of that's able to link into what turnover looks like and those that are truly engaged as part of their employee experience as well.
That's good, Glenn. Thanks very much. And I saw a quick question there from Eric going to the chat room just in relation to return on investment, and we're going to cover that as a topic at the end of the interviews. Thanks, Eric, and we'll come back to that. Just a couple of quick ones, Glenn, just before we move across to Claire. A leadership budget and a training budget, are they all the same? Are they separated? What's your experience there between those two particular elements of the financial support for leadership capability?
Yeah, look, I've always tried to call it out separately as unique investments. I think that probably taking to a certain extent, and this is kind of very basic, of course, as an example would be, I'd see that the learning is some of the ongoing enterprise stuff that you need to have the baseline skills or refining skills to execute your role, whereas the leadership element is something specifically called out that all organisations and business needs to really truly invest in for the business-wide model. And I think where I've been successful in the past in selling that as a journey and as a concept is about how do we ensure mobility of talent across your enterprise rather than only within the vertical. And a real example of that may be in a multi-division, organisation where you've got divisions A, B, C, and D, and one division is more successful or more profitable than another. In the employee experience can often shift in terms of saying Division A is got a killing and they spend a fortune on learning because they have the money, whereas there's a much smaller margin in Division B. Their ability to give the employee experience, developing both learning and leadership is somewhat limited because of the profitability of that particular division. My sentiment has strongly been geared towards that centralised model. So irrespective of division, you're still employed by that parent company, irrespective of whether you're a division A, B, C, or D, and your ability to call that out and really invest in leadership across all areas of your business creates that well-rounded enterprise leader rather than an expert in division A, but that a lack of ability to transfer those experiences into other divisions because they've not been exposed to. Then it ultimately uncovers leaders that have some key strengths, but then also some relatively large developmental gaps outside of their own sphere of knowledge and expertise.
Good on you, Glenn. Thanks very much for sharing your insights with us. Swing across now to Claire. I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, Claire, and perhaps you can scope the leadership capability investment that you wanted to focus on.
Sure. Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the opportunity. Yes, Claire Howells, currently Head of Talent and Learning at Cleanaway, which might be a familiar company name to you, sustainable waste management company that's instrumental in leading Australia's circular economy. I've just recently joined Cleanaway after a significant period of time overseas, around 17 years. So today I'm actually going to share my experiences based on that broader environment rather than just honing in on one intervention. And the connection that I'd like to make for you after global experience across both S&P 500 and ASX 100 listed companies that are in technically complex and highly regulated environments like finance, banking, explosives and industrial chemicals, and now waste management. The connection that I've been able to make with leadership is just that importance of holistically looking at leadership connected to other disciplines like your technical competency and, importantly, safety, if that's an environment where safety is important to you. My questions then become around how do we actually, as OD practitioners, support the organisation to build that culture of operational excellence and true operational excellence for what it looks like for the context of that business. So how does the link to safety and leadership come together in a way that the business doesn't end up being confused? And how do we then build meaningful change related to leadership so that the leaders in the business are actually strong leaders for that business context? I'm glad to be here, Mark.
That's good, Claire. Thank you very much. Tell me a bit about your experience with leadership roadmaps and what your thoughts are. Do you have a leadership roadmap as you move into the next year or the next period? And why is it important for us to have a bit of clarity around what that roadmap or that journey is going to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. My answer to that is yes. What that roadmap looks like is different, right, in every context and organisation, but building the people capability is absolutely crucial to delivering on company strategy. And if we want as a group to move beyond singular interventions, building capability usually requires programs of work. Some of those programs of work are highly customised, especially as we get up into senior leadership. But even if we're thinking about connecting frontline leadership in a way that it creates senior leaders and builds leaders in the organisation, the programs of work that we're thinking about or need to be thinking about are usually run over periods of time rather than single interventions. They may take months, weeks, or maybe even years to fulfill. So the short answer is yes, have a roadmap. The longer answer is have a roadmap that works in cadence and rhythm to the business. I can't stress enough that for the roadmap itself to succeed, it needs to be in step and balance the need of what the business has, both the desire to achieve and also the capacity to take on. And look, the example I'll share there is a women's leadership program in an organisation overseas where, as Glenn mentioned earlier, highly male-dominated industry, really great leadership program for women in the business. And the women came out really energised and ready to make a difference and ready to succeed. But we had to balance the number of participants in that session. Otherwise, we had so many people coming out energised and wanting to make a change and wanting to make a difference that the business reaction was just, whoa, right? So as OD practitioners, it's not just about creating an amazing program that gets that success. Of course, we want that. But then you've got to think about what's the next step. After people come out of the program, how does that effort, energy and learning then get embedded back into the business cadence? What does that look like? What are the embedding activities that you need to be able to take that classroom learning or that intervention learning experience and make it successful? They're all things that are best placed onto a roadmap so that for each intervention, you can see what the initial piece looks like and then what the embedding looks like and how much are you placing on the business, who gets involved with that. At a high level, really what I'm saying is that the roadmap shows the intention behind the planned initiative. It helps clarify the strategy, and sharing that roadmap actually helps us as practitioners communicate. And more importantly, I think it was both Glenn and Vicky spoke to the opportunity to really have feedback on the programs that we're putting out there. I shape that a slightly different way and say that it's the opportunity to invite others into that conversation, to get that feedback, but to bring, by doing so, help a broader audience than just the OD or the HR team or the direct leaders involved become part of the journey. So one of the things that I like to build into a roadmap is briefing, particularly executive briefings. If there's any kind of leadership development program, pick out one or two things that your executive team can help support, teach them about that, help them understand the concept of that, and brief them before the program so that they can show up in the best way as leaders to be able to firstly speak coherently to that program, but secondly support it and get behind it. If you build that in to your program, you'll get more sustainable sustainable, sorry, I'm having trouble with that word today.
Such a key piece of the
embedding.
influence. Such a key piece of the influencing part there, Claire, isn't it? To really make sure you're engaging. What is it that you want them to do, and how you want them to do it, and then to a certain extent as well, too, you're training your monkeys to be able to execute the message that's really aligned to what you're after.
Absolutely. And then too, if you brief, so for me, safety's always been an important part of the businesses that I work in. So then there's this whole other group of practitioners that, depending on the maturity of the organisation, are either closely or not closely connected to OD, but it's our health and safety practitioners. So we've got health and safety, we've got HR, we've got operations. How do you bring those groups together? Briefings and communication pathways can just be so critical to making sure that everyone's on the same page. And then there's the conversation too around what you want to keep moving forward with and what maybe needs to hold or be sequenced differently to allow the right leadership development to occur. So for me, I really think yes, always have a roadmap, but then also use that roadmap. Don't let it sit on the shelf. Use it to help create a cadence of conversation that allows you to gain support, resource and focus to help you drive and build that leadership capability over the long term.
And testing it with your HR business partners as well too, Claire, is I think something that that's to a certain extent I've seen a couple of times in across the journey, is something that's probably underinvested somewhat. So those nuances of where is the blackout periods across for particular divisions that we say in retail-based organisations, launching a brand new program of work around Black Friday or around Boxing Day sales is just corporate suicide, so to speak. But I think really understanding what are those major times, and maybe in Vicky's industry, maybe that's harvest time, launching a new program where people are going to be off site for 3 days or on calls for 2 or 3 hours is maybe not the wisest move in that vicinity or in that window as well. So I think that influencing and engaging part and really keeping people abreast of this is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and the timings attached to those is a real enabler for support, saying, well, you agreed to send your people on these days. It is a way for that accountability to almost double down, but also gaining that support and again linking into that advocacy piece, really enables us to be successful. I really like your strategy there.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Ben. And you prompted a thought in me as well, that the other piece that sometimes gets missed around leadership at a critical point is if you're in a business where there's lots of mergers and acquisitions or divestiture, consolidation, oftentimes the leaders that are coming in to the business from those avenues are in manual processes. They're not necessarily integrated with your HRIS system. So making sure that you've got a checkpoint in your leadership roadmap to catch the new leaders or the manual leaders or those people coming in off leave or out on leaves, depending on what your data setup is. It helps to have prompts in your roadmap to make sure that you're really evaluating the catch-all for leaders, because if I think about those leaders that are onboarding into a culture, whether they're new or they're being acquired or merged, that can be a critical time for make or break leadership success, and is often an overlooked part of a leadership roadmap.
And it's a great onboarding experience as well too, isn't it, Claire, about helping that leader to build their profile across the organisation. So in that M&A example is that if they've been swallowed by the corporate organisation, is that their 40, 50, 20 number of employees are very familiar with whom that individual is. But for the balance of organisation is that person's just letters on page, helping to build their profile, especially in top end talent development activities as well too, of very influential people across your business. That ability to be seen and have that message as a continued message throughout new leaders into your broader business is a really wonderful opportunity, and gaining that advocate in your corner as well too, of really getting people behind your initiatives is a great way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick comment, Claire, on the relationship between a leadership roadmap and its differentiation or alignment with a capability framework. Anything you want to share there about these particular artefacts and how they integrate, relate together, cohabitate?
Sure, and I think what I'll do there too is speak a little on how to build, what the leadership roadmap looks like and how to build it. For me, the roadmap links the why of your strategies with your work plan. They're two separate things for me, the roadmap and the work plan, and then the timeline for completion, the when. Of course, what doesn't get captured there as practitioners is the whole lot of energy that we need to use to engage the how. It's very easy to map out in a roadmap what we want to do and when we want to do it and why it's important. But the how of what gets done is really important. And sometimes my roadmap looks like this lovely designed graphic piece similar to what Lighthouse put up, and other times, honestly, it's sticky notes on a wall, and that depends honestly on the business that I'm working with. For me, it's not physically what the roadmap looks like that's important. What is absolutely critical, though, is whether or not it's fit for purpose. And that's where this link between what's competency and capability comes in for me. I think as practitioners, it's really crucial for us to understand what business problem is trying to be solved. So where is the business at? First, come in and understand how mature is your business, what's their strategy, and what is it they're actually trying to do. And then we need to be a little bit brave as OD practitioners and challenge the status quo. More times than not, I find that the group that comes to me, whether it's for a communication, a learning intervention, a huge OD piece, a capability build, what they describe to me at first, if I dig in under it a little bit, it's not always what the end result needs to be. And so it's about having those conversations with the business to find out where groups are stalled or stagnated, where the business is trying to get to, and really picking up some rocks to understand what's getting in the way of that. But also, if we look at a leadership framework, we've probably all got them, right? Whether I could name many of the big five that could give you a framework, or maybe you've built a custom leadership framework. It really doesn't matter. But what I would say is that's the broad view of what's needed, and that's the broad view of what good leadership looks like. I hope that as you look at your framework, you'll draw in what good looks like from outside your business lens, right? So more broadly, industry best practice, what does good leadership look like? But then narrow that down a bit for what's the context of the business in which you're operating, and therefore what's the shape that leadership needs to take, not to shape it purely just to your business, but what's the success profile is what I call it. So we've got this common thread of what good leadership looks like, but then there's the success profile for what it looks like within your business context. Because what I do know is that what leadership looks like in the financial service sector is completely different to what it needs to look like if I'm working for a graphic design agency or a sporting agency. The common and core elements are there, but there are tweaks. And so the connection to roadmap for me is in getting into the tweaks and refining just the 2 or 3 things that are absolutely critical for the business to work on now. Right, because most businesses, to Glenn's point earlier, we're being asked to do more with less. There's also a piece in that around what the business and what leaders are actually able to absorb and what human beings are able to absorb at the moment overall. So the way that I build a roadmap is to then take all of that into consideration, link it to agility and resistance, like what's the level of that exists in the business, and then design a customized pathway and have those conversations around getting the cadence around it. So I think it's just foundational, Mark, to get clarity around context and purpose in the business. What are we trying to do on leadership? That way we can get precision and really use simple words to guide the worlds that we want to operate in. So regardless of whether or not you've got a leadership framework, whether you don't, just think about what are the 2 or 3 concepts that your people really need to understand around what good like to be successful in your business. And I think that's where you really start to nail it.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for sharing your insights. The last question, I'm just going to open it to the panel and each of you can provide some comment. How you measure the return on investment on leadership capability and how you apply it. Just anything you'd like to share there, because it's quite an elusive topic for many of us, but for those that are interested in the numbers, they're always keen to be able to try and find some sort of way in which we can provide a quantitative as well as a qualitative measure on leadership investment. Over to you.
Yeah, I quite liked Claire's comments around being flexible and agile, right, to business needs, and really finding that space for people to learn. And when we talk about return on investment, it's really about rocking up and creating that space, isn't it? And it's not just the 10% that I know that we talk about quite a lot with programs, but it's also that they're doing it in their own time, right? They're practicing in the workplace and you're actually seeing that happen. So I think that whole actually seeing the behaviours come out post the training and the individual driving their own learning is super important. And again, to Claire's point around being flexible and Glenn's point around engaging stakeholders is also think about that test and learn piece, right? It doesn't have to be this big bang program that we're going to implement and then we're expecting this outcome. It's actually choose a small group, really understand their needs, tailor the program to that group, and test and learn and change and modify as needed for the wider business. And of course, yes, lean into those programs when it makes sense for those individuals, because yes, we do not go to the operations business through vintage, absolutely not. And again, you don't talk to finance at end of financial year either. But I also think it's really important that you go back to the original objectives in order to be able to determine your return on investment. So Claire said that around really understanding the development that the individual or the group actually need from the beginning, right? So it's not just looking at your leadership model or your competency framework or your roadmap, right? It's actually really understanding what that group needs. And if you really understand that, you'll develop a program that will actually tap into those needs, and you'll be able to measure that at the other end. Right. So I really like that point, Claire, that you made about understanding what the learning is and what the outcomes needed. But also, I think, in my instance, it's really going back to those original data sets that I was talking about around, leadership competencies. Are we improving? Are we getting better? Are we shifting to a more high-performing organisation? Are our wellbeing results coming through that we're starting to really alleviate those stress levels and prioritise and making decisions better as an organisation? And I guess finally, are our managers actually pulling back from HR and really empowered to make those decisions themselves, and leading those conversations is a big one for me.
Becky, I'll jump in with two that back onto those that you've just mentioned in terms of setting it up at the beginning to what do they need to learn. That's super important. And there's one core question I always ask, doesn't matter what the course is. It's an easy one to implement. I base it on a net promoter score, so the 1 to 10 scale. And the question simply is, would you recommend this course to, or this intervention, this experience to a colleague? Because in all honesty, employees that are in learning like children, like little children, they will tell you, if you ask them, they will tell you whether or not they enjoyed it. I don't know how many memes there are out there of people clicking through online courses being bored, right? But ask your people, would you recommend it, right? And then it's what you do with that that's key. Any score that is below a 7, find out why, find out what they didn't like about it, and then tweak it, do something to adjust it, make it better. So that's my number one. My number two around ROI. I've always got a learning hat on and then a talent and succession hat. So for me, the connection between leadership and ROI is the strength of succession plan. Are you willing to promote for open leadership positions? If if your leadership roadmap is working well and you have a build philosophy, so unless you're one of the rare organisations that truly has a buy leadership philosophy, most of us are doing leadership development because we're trying to build the capability of leaders. So we have some ready to promote into positions at various levels in the org. So just a very simple measure on percentage of internal placements made in your organisation is a key and very easy trackable measure on ROI. If you can show that over time your internal placements are increasing, that's telling you that something you're doing in leadership's working. It may not tell you it's not a direct science, right? It's not going to tell you the value of a specific program. There are lots of different measures, Mark, but I think the challenge on this one is the ability to get to those measures depends on the maturity of data capture in the organisation. This data piece is an area of passion for me because I had the pleasure of working with Jack Fitzens, who's the father of all HR metrics. So I'd love to dig into that with you sometime, Mark, in a different way. There's lots of ways we can measure ROI, but they're my two simple ones.
Thank you, Claire. And Glenn, in your 15 seconds, anything you'd like to add?
A really succinct answer as well. How are you using your performance management process as well to use something like your NPS? And a really simple search terminology for you is, how does Google manage the effectiveness of their leaders? And there's a quick question set that you can look to utilise or bastardize that down in terms of, if you were to go at the end of the year, if Mark was my leader come the end of the year, give, similar to an employee engagement survey experience where they need to have 5 direct reports to get their specific answer, I might need to rate Mark out of 10 in terms of, would I recommend Mark as a leader to other team members within my organisation? It's going to give you a bit of a snapshot, especially within windows of that. So Division A, wonderful. Division B, maybe not so strong, that kind of thing. It can help you orient towards where you're utilising your finite resources to get the greatest impact from that, and it gives you both that both cues are accounted for in terms of the types of measures that you're looking at as well, which you can really then talk to for those that you need to have as key influence points to say, stronger leaders point A, not so strong here, this is where we're going to orient towards to create a baseline level of leadership which will enable all of these other wondrous things that we've got.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everybody. It's 1 o'clock. We'd just like to say thank you for everyone for giving up your time today and sharing the event with us. And I just want to say thanks again to Vicky, to Claire and to Glenn for sharing their insights today. Extremely valuable, and we wish you well for the rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.